In this video, we'll take a look at some of the basics of event handling with Vue, with an example on the login page here, which you should have added here already if you're following along, but which is also available in the exercise files in the Chapter 1 Video 6 Start folder. So again, we have our simple Vue instance that's mounted to the element with ID app, and it has a single property in the data object called message, whose value will be displayed with string interpolation here. So let's take a look at the page. Next, I'm going to attach an event handler to respond to clicks of this button here. To do that, instead of using vbind:, I'll want to use vOn:, and then the name of the event I want to handle, click. And then I can just add any number of JavaScript statements here. For now, I'll just change the message to welcome. So if we refresh, we can see that clicking that button does indeed run that code. But putting all the event handling code in the directive argument is usually not practical. So generally, what we'll want to do is add a method to our Vue instance that will call to handle this. So now we'll define a third property of this object that's passed to the Vue constructor called methods. And just like data, this is going to be an object itself, and for now it will have one property called login. This will be a function, and now we can move this logic inside it. One caveat here, although we can refer to data properties and directives using only their names, when referencing them from Vue instance methods, we'll want to access them using the this keyword. And you probably know, and we'll see later on, that there are some scenarios where this will refer to something else completely, and we'll have to make sure we're correctly referencing our Vue instance. Also, be careful here because leaving off the this won't cause an error, since it would be a valid way of declaring a new variable unless you're using JavaScript's strict mode. Then, of course, we need to replace that statement that we took out of the directive value with a call to this method. Refresh the page, and we can see that this works the same as before, but it's just a little cleaner. Let's take a moment to enhance this a little bit using some of the concepts we've discussed so far. It could be helpful to add a property to our data object that indicates whether or not the user is logged in. And we'll give this a default value of false. Then our login function can set that to true, in addition to setting the message value. So one thing we can use this for is to toggle the visibility of the login button, since we won't want it to appear once the user has clicked it. So we'll do that by adding vif with not logged in. Then it becomes simple to add a logout button and to make sure only one of them is visible at a time. Let's add a method to handle logging out as well. We'll set logged in to false and the message to so long. And let me add a missing semicolon up here. While attaching the handler to my logout button, I'm going to show you the shorthand for vOn. You might try :click, but remember that would be the shorthand for vbind with an attribute named click, which doesn't even exist. If we were to bind to onClick, which does exist, we would be setting up a plain JavaScript event handler in the global context and not a Vue event handler. The shorthand for vOn is simply the @ sign. So we can use @click equals logout. And that would be equivalent to vOnClick equals logout. There's no reason we can't add parameters here. For instance, I could pass the username if I had it handy, and then modify the message to include it if this function could accept the username parameter. We can also pass the event itself using $event. For example, if we were to wrap these buttons in a form element, then clicking them would cause a full page refresh. To prevent that, say if this were an Ajax login, we could accept event as a parameter and then call event.login prevent default. Now a page load is avoided when I click login, but not log out because I didn't change that one. But this is all a little bit cumbersome just to prevent the page reload. So Vue also has a number of useful modifiers that we can chain to the click directives, and one of those is prevent for just this purpose. So now we're preventing the full page reload in two different ways. There's also stop for stop propagation and modifiers you can use to recognize keyboard input. I'd recommend reviewing the section in the guide on event modifiers to see what you might find useful. Next, we'll start to wrap up our first chapter by looking at how we work with class and style attributes, since that syntax is slightly different than other types of bindings.